There's a trial happening in California right now that could change how social media works. Meta and Alphabet, which owns Google, are being sued. The case is about a 20-year-old woman named Kaylee who says that YouTube and Instagram caused her serious mental health problems starting when she was in elementary school. This isn't about content moderation or what people are allowed to post. The accusation is about how these platforms are built. It is also about features like infinite scroll, push notifications, and the way algorithms recommend content were specifically designed to keep young people hooked. And according to the lawsuit, internal documents show that these companies knew this could harm kids and they prioritized keeping them hooked anyway. Kaylee started using Instagram at around 10 years old, before age restrictions were really enforced. She says the platform became addictive pretty quickly. Auto-scrolling meant that there was never an actual stopping point. The algorithm kept serving her content that pulled her deeper in. Over time, she developed anxiety, depression, and body image issues that followed her into adulthood. And she's not the only one. There are hundreds of similar cases being brought against these companies right now. But what makes this case different is the angle. It is not asking whether the content itself is harmful. It's asking if the design of the platform was built to exploit how young brains work. That's a question about engineering, not speech. And if the court decides that these companies knew what they were doing and did it anyway, the consequences could extend far beyond Meta and YouTube. To understand what this case is really about, you need to understand how social media platforms actually work. These platforms aren't just a tool that people use. It's a system designed to maximize the time you spend on it. That is not a secret. Companies talk about engagement metrics very openly. The question is, what happens when that system is pointed at kids? Platforms use something called variable reward loops. You scroll and sometimes you see something interesting and sometimes you don't. That unpredictability is what keeps people coming back. It's the same psychology behind slot machines. You never know when the next win is coming, so you just keep pulling the lever. On social media, the lever is your thumb, and the win is when you see a post that makes you laugh or a video that's entertaining. Then there's social comparison. Platforms are built around feedback from other people. Likes, comments, shares. For adults, that can be stressful or validating depending on the day. For teenagers whose brains are still developing and who are extremely sensitive to social approval, that feedback loop can become overwhelming. Every post is a test, and every notification is a reminder of how you're being judged by your peers. And the algorithm learns. It figures out what keeps you watching and serves you more of it. If you watch political content, you get more political content. If you watch beauty tutorials, you get more of those. The system personalizes itself to you, which might sound helpful until you realize that that can trap you into patterns that just aren't good for you. None of this is necessarily evil. These are just tools companies use to keep people engaged. But when you apply them to a 12-year-old who doesn't have fully developed impulse control or emotional regulation, the effect can be very different. And that's what this lawsuit is trying to prove. Last week I made a video about how companies like Google and Roblox email kids when they turn 13 to tell them they can loosen parental restrictions. That was about autonomy being handed to children through policy changes. This case is about what happens once they have that autonomy and start spending hours every day inside systems that are designed to keep their attention for as long as possible. The CEO of Meta himself, Mark Zuckerberg, testified in this case. It was his first time ever testifying in a jury trial, which should tell you how serious this is. He was asked if Instagram's goal was to maximize the amount of time people spent on the platform, and he said that that used to be true, but the company changed its approach years ago. He also claimed that they are now focusing on meaningful interaction instead of just raw engagement. But internal documents tell a very different story. In 2016, Zuckerberg sent an email saying that he wanted to increase time spent on Meta apps by 12% over 3 years. That is pretty explicit. Then in 2022, Adam Mosseri, who runs Instagram, sent an internal memo citing engagement as a primary goal, especially with teenagers. So there's a pretty big gap between what the company says publicly and what they prioritize internally. Zuckerberg also admitted that Instagram still has trouble keeping kids under 13 off the platform. They have policies against it, but enforcement is difficult, which means the very demographic they're supposed to protect is still accessing the app and being served content by the same algorithms everyone else gets. The lawsuit argues that these companies operate like digital casinos. They target young users whose brains are still developing, embed features that exploit psychological vulnerabilities, and do it all to increase ad revenue. It's a strong accusation, and if the jury believes it, the implications could be huge. Other companies are watching this closely. For example, TikTok and Snapchat have settled similar lawsuits confidentially, which suggests that they saw enough risk to avoid going to trial. Meta and YouTube, however, decided to fight it, which means they either believe that they can win or that settling could set a bad precedent. So what happens if the jury sides with Kaylee? The most immediate impact would obviously be on Meta and YouTube. But the bigger effect would be on the entire industry. If a court establishes that companies can be held legally responsible for designing features that harm kids, that changes the calculation for every company that builds social media products. Right now, the incentive is pretty straightforward. More engagement means more ads, and more ads mean more revenue. Less friction also means more engagement. Stronger emotional reactions mean people stay longer. It's not complicated. The question this trial is asking is whether companies whose business depends on maximizing attention can also be trusted to limit the psychological techniques they use to capture it. That is an economic question, not a moral one, and courts are now being asked to answer it. If platforms are being required to redesign their products to prioritize safety over engagement, especially for younger users, that could mean major changes. Limits on notifications, restrictions on algorithmic recommendations, and transparency requirements about how content gets promoted. All of that costs money and reduces the stickiness of the platform. There's also another question worth asking. Are we comfortable with the idea that growing up now means spending thousands more hours in systems optimized to hold your attention? Adolescence used to involve boredom, awkward social situations, and figuring things out without constant stimulation. Now a lot of that has been replaced by scrolling. And just like in my last video, I'm not saying these platforms are inherently bad, or that we should ban social media for teens. However, I do think we should be asking whether the way these systems are designed is compatible with healthy development, and whether companies should be allowed to prioritize engagement over everything else when the users are still kids. This case isn't just about one family or one lawsuit. It's about whether we accept that engineered engagement is now a default part of growing up. And if we do accept it, who gets to decide what limits exist? Right now, companies are making that call on their own. This trial is testing whether courts should have a say too. If you like this video and want to hear more about these things, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And let me know in the comments down below, do you think platforms should be held responsible for how they're designed? Or is this something that families need to manage on their own? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.